Welcome to my review of the ORICO M.2 SSD Enclosure. We'll be going over what you get in the box, the installation, getting it to work on a Windows 10 machine, and running some speed tests. I had this 2TB NVMe M.2 SSD that needed to use, and I thought this enclosure would help me with large games and virtual instrument storage. You get the enclosure, two short cables, one USB-C to C, one is USB-A to C, a thermal pad, two rubber fasteners, a T5 screwdriver, and an extra screw. And you get a little bit of instructions. Using the supplied screwdriver, remove the T5 screw and remove cover. This fits almost all kinds of SSDs, so it should fit. Place a rubber fastener to your SSD and then install the SSD like you would normally do on a motherboard, which is at an angle, and then you press down to secure. The thing I didn't like about this was that the whole board would move down as I was trying to get the rubber fastener to get into the board. But I eventually got it, and it didn't seem to hurt it. Next, we'll install the supplied thermal pad. Remove the protective plastic film and place on the SSD. Remove the protective plastic film on the other side also. Here it is with the cover back on. And another view of the short cables that came with it. I first had it on the USB-C to USB-C connection, and here's how it looks. Next, you need to run disk management or create and format hard disk partition. You will probably get this pop-up screen to initialize the hard drive. Just use the GPT method. Next, we see the new drive, but we need to tell Windows what to do with it. So you need to right-click and choose New Simple Volume. Click Next. And choose your volume size. I'm going to use the whole drive. I'm okay with the G letter, but you do what you want. And click Next. I'm going to format this with NTFS and the default unit size. Rename the volume label to something that makes sense. I'm going to leave the quick format settings on and click Next. Review your settings and click Finish if okay. You can bring up File Explorer using the Window key plus E as a shortcut, and then you can check out your new SSD. Next, I'm going to show you how to move your games between hard drives and the Steam application. And then this will basically be what I'm testing, and I'll use some other testing methods. Go to Settings, then Storage. We need to add the new hard drive. This first test is moving 5.89 gigs from my external USB 8TB Seagate drive to my new USB SSD. I'm using the short USB-C to USB-C cable using a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port on the back of a motherboard. I used a data speed calculator, and it says the speed was 485.8 megabits per second. Test number 2 I moved a 64GB game from an internal SSD to the new USB SSD, but I used a different USB-C to USB-C cable. I believe it was a 3-foot one that might have came from a tablet or a phone. This took about 30 minutes, and that calculated to be 285.33 megabits per second. Test number 3, I moved a 66GB game from an internal SSD to the new USB SSD. I used their supplied USB-A to USB-C cable. Somehow this only took 3 minutes, not 30, and calculated speeds are 2,946.7 megabits per second, which is like 10 times faster than the last test. Very strange. Test number 4, I moved a 51GB game from an internal SSD. I used their supplied USB-A to USB-C cable, and I believe I used the rear port Type A that is a USB 3.1 Gen 2, which should be the same speed as my Type C. This port seemed to be the fastest, and one of the reasons that I tried different ports was that I believe I kept hearing disconnect and reconnect USB sounds. This was actually during a recent BTD6 Boss event that I was recording. Once I unplugged the USB-C cable, that hard drive, the noise has stopped. So far this USB-A connection seems the fastest and more stable so far. Winsat Tests. I ran a Winsat command test against my different hard drives. This is a command line tool that measures the performance of a storage device using different types of tests. I have a visual chart after these Winsat screenshots. Based on these results, my new external M.2 should be a little faster than my internal SSD. Bonus items. The ORICO M.2 Enclosure says it supports up to 4 terabytes and that it also has the auto sleep design. If you are having any issues with this is how you can disable PowerSavings on your USB drive on Windows 10. So in the power settings, I would uncheck that allow the computer to turn off. You would also might want to check your power settings in the advanced settings. Here is some game footage of the game Teardown. I believe this is running on my RX 6800 at 3440 by 1440. Running off the new drive. Seems to work just fine. I might do an update video later if I move my musical instruments, or if I have any other further issues. Want to go over some pros and cons. The pros, it's very light, it's small, and it lets you use an M.2 SSD if your motherboard doesn't like 2 NVMe's like mine. The cons, it's not as fast as a true M.2 slot on your motherboard. The board moves a lot when you're trying to secure the rubber fastener, as I mentioned in the install. The cables are short, and then some of the reviewers and myself seem to get a lot slower speeds when not using their supplied cable. So further testing needs done on that, but it's interesting. Hope you enjoyed my review. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.